instead of switching to an electrically assisted rack, Lotus said, why would we do that? You have better feel with hydraulic. Hey crew, I've got the key to that Lotus Emira. We are going to take it for a drive, but first, let's check out how it looks on the inside and outside. The successor to the Evora and the final internal combustion Lotus to be built, the Emira is a significant car. Up front, we've got the Lotus badge above functional ventilation all across, including brake cooling ducts. There are projector LED headlights and turn signals. These deep cuts on the hood are there to exhaust heat from the radiators. This one's painted in Hethel Yellow, and while I'm not always into yellow on sports or supercars, this mustardy hue on this car looks fantastic. At the side is a set of 20-inch forged alloy wheels wrapped in your choice of Goodyear Eagle F1 summer tires or Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2s, both sized 245 section front and 295 at the rear. Within those wheels are ventilated discs clamped on by black painted calipers. There's black gloss for the side sill and for this side inlet to cool the mid-mounted motor. There's also an Emira First Edition badge on this one. The profile shows off some short overhangs and lovely sculpting. I see a little bit of McLaren Artura in this design, and that's a very good thing. At the back, there's a window to the Supercharged V6, along with thin LED taillights and turn signals, above some functional ducting, and two large center-ish exit exhausts and a black gloss diffuser. I genuinely don't think there's a bad angle on this car, and that's very unusual for me to say. So my question for you is, what's the best color for it? Yellow, red, dark green, blue? Let me know in the comments, and let's check out the interior. Now, as we open up to take a look inside, keep in your minds that the Lotus interior design philosophy has always been one of minimalism and functionality. The Emira's cabin is a grand departure from that. We've got these beautiful leather-trimmed seats in tan, multi-way power adjustments. They're heated. They've got 2 positions of memory for the driver's seat. There's leather all over the dashboard and door panels. You get a high-end KEF sound system. KEF is apparently a British audio company. 2 one-touch windows, power adjusting and power folding door mirrors, large door pockets. In terms of easing your entry and exit, the sills in the Emira are narrower than the Evora, and the door opening aperture is larger. For cargo space, you can slide forward the seat and find a large parcel shelf, and there's also 5 cubic feet of space behind the engine. 2 quick noteworthies before I hop inside. This is the 6-speed manual equipped car, and the aluminum pedals are really closely stacked together for rev matching. There's also a see-through mesh panel to look at the gear shift linkage. I don't think I've ever seen that before. It's really cool. Now inside and closing up the door, it's a solid thud. Perforated leather wrap for the steering wheel, which has thick grips at 9 and 3, a flat bottom to it, controls on the wheel, digital gauge cluster that just timed out, leather wrapping up on the dashboard, a 10.2-inch touchscreen infotainment system that is pretty darn quick and has wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Beneath is a wireless charging pad, physical dials for your single zone of auto climate, drive mode selector, volume knob. There's some gloss black surrounding the aluminum gear shift lever, start-stop button, and cup holders that just won't wear very well. Leather tops the console, and inside is narrow but deep storage with 2 USB ports in addition to the one in front of the gear shift lever. Headroom for myself at 6 feet tall under the suede wrapped headliner is not bad, and I may even be able to fit on a helmet for track duty. Visibility is also pretty decent, which is good because there's no blind spot monitoring. Otherwise, this cabin has everything you need with high-end materials and controls that are just logically placed. Now let's take the Lotus Emira for a drive. All right, let's fire it up. Just hang on. It's a little more extroverted of a startup than the Toyota Camry that shares this engine, but not a whole lot more. And that just, the start-stop button is kind of pesky because you've got to lift it and then access it. It's not like the Lamborghini ones where they lift up and it stays up. It just wants to come right back down. I guess you could sneak your finger in through this opening here. That just doesn't seem well designed. Hello, cabin crew. Thank you for joining me for this drive in the Lotus Emira. And we've got a few different drive modes to choose from here. On this drive mode selector, we can bring up either Tour, Sport, or Track. Let's begin in Tour. And that's not going to change the suspension dampening because we have passive dampers in the Emira. We're going to pull this all the way over and go up, which reverse really is, it fights you. It doesn't want to go in reverse. You have to really urge it into place. That does bring up a high resolution backup camera, and it's got a nice wide angle view with trajectory lines. No problem going into first. And we'll begin, as we do, with a turning radius test. Wheel cranked. And I mean, it's a good turning radius. It's not magic given the size of the vehicle. And the turn signal sound. It's so light. Much like the steering. I enjoy it. And for the world famous horn test, we have a very taxi cab sounding horn. Can't say I like it. Doesn't feel like it matches the character of the Emira. The powertrain, though, that does match the character. Lotus has a history of using Toyota-sourced powertrains, and we have one here. At least this is one of the engine options. This 3.5-liter V6 out of a Camry has been supercharged to make 400 horsepower and either 310 pound-feet of torque with the 6-speed manual or 317 with the 6-speed torque converter automatic. There's also going to be a Lotus Emira version with a 2.0 turbo 4-cylinder from Mercedes-Benz. That will make 360 horsepower and won't come with a manual option. It will only be equipped with a 8-speed dual-clutch automatic. But this supercharged V6 and the manual gearbox is where they're starting with these first editions, and it's where it should be. This is a wonderful powertrain, and the gearbox is fantastic. It's so connected. The cogs are incredibly clear, the throws are ultra short, and the clutch is also very easy to manage. The engagement point is well defined. The release point takes a little bit of finessing and is later with the pedal release than I thought it would be. But once you're in the groove, this is so easy to drive this car. Though it's never absent-minded. Some manuals are so slushy that you don't have to pay any attention. This one is rigid and kind of loud and requires a bit of arm strength to get it into the next gear. So it requires your attention. It requires you to be involved to some degree, even when meandering around town. And I love that. I love that it doesn't let you forget that it is a driver's car first and foremost. It just happens to be tolerable for daily driving, for commuting, for getting groceries, especially in this tour specification. So there are two versions of the Emira right now. You got the sport version and the tour version. I'm not talking about drive modes. I'm talking about suspension and tire setups from the factory. So the Tour and the Sport both have passive dampers, but it's the way they've configured them. So in Tour, they reduce the spring rates and they reduce the rebound, and so you're not jostling around quite as much as you would be in the Sport. Not having driven it, just logically, that's what would happen more in the Sport. And because we have the Goodyear Eagle F1 summer tires and not the Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2s, which are much harder compound and therefore more brittle riding and would transfer more of the road texture into the cabin, it's actually very livable, this car. The dampening will take the edge off a bump or a rut in the road, so you don't have to carry a lot of tension in your shoulders. The seats are very adjustable and comfortable, so you can find a good driving position for yourself. And the cabin, for a Lotus, is very quiet. So let's just, at these speeds, listen for the NVH level. Yes, you have some tire noise, a little bit of wind noise, but if you were to hop out of a Exige, Elise, or even the Evora into this, you would swear it was a different car company. It is so much better insulated, and again lends itself to a car that could be daily driven. And the power delivery from this supercharged V6 is fantastic, even here in 6th gear at 2,000 RPM. You dig into it, and you will build up to speed. You're not having to wait an eternity for that. And every time you do go to the throttle, you not only get that linear power delivery and a little bit of supercharger whine, but you also get the visual delight of peeking into the rearview mirror and seeing the throttle open up. That's big kid stuff. That's made for Miles. And so that even in the tour drive mode, you're having a good time. And that's just the tip of the iceberg in the Emira. There's so much more. So let's now move into the sport drive mode. I'm just gonna perk up that throttle response, downshift a couple gears, which, by the way, there's no rev match function in the Emira, so you're blipping your own throttle or you're relying on the synchros. Wouldn't recommend. And put our foot down. There's that 400 horsepower in a lightweight 3,100 pound package. Yeah, the Emira hustles all the way out to its red line of 6,800 RPM. And the supercharger whine mingles with that V6 note. If we want to isolate the supercharger whine, or actually just listen in for it more closely, I'll roll down the windows a little bit. I love it, and it's something I frankly miss in my supercharged Cadillac CT5V Blackwing. So getting it here in full force is very pleasant. Now I think it's time to see how quick the Emira will get to 60 with the manual gearbox in a real-world setting. I've got my race box set up here to record. I'll move into the track drive mode, and there is no launch control function, so I've just got stability control switched off. I'm going to rev it out. Get to 60 in seconds in 4.78 seconds. That's quick enough. Now that run to 60 was about a half second slower than what Car and Driver was able to do with repeated runs and likely a more perfect launch than mine. But the Emira really isn't about drag racing. This car is about curves. And as luck would have it, I know of some good ones. Oh yes. The first thing about the Emira that stands out to me is the hydraulic steering. Instead of switching to an electrically assisted rack, Lotus said, why would we do that? You better feel with hydraulic. And you most certainly do, especially when it's calibrated like in this car, with a tire load. And the grip limits are communicated so clearly. And though it is light on center, as you add lock, the chassis really starts talking to you. And this softer tour-grade suspension also means there's a bit of roll, but it might just be extra communication, and it helps the back end come around a little bit. The car just dances, as only something with this small of a footprint and this low of a curb weight can. It involves you. It satisfies you. The mechanical limited slip differential has no trouble moving the power between the rear tires for fast corner exits. I wouldn't mind driving the sport grade of this car with the Cup 2 tires, because while the brakes have good bite to them, the Goodyears seem like they might be at their limit. I say this again, now here in a performance context, I love this gearbox. The sense of accomplishment you have when you work into each new gear, and how closely spaced the pedals are, so you can just roll your right foot over to match that rev, and how quickly the throttle does blip, so it's always a perfect rev match. The Lotus Emira is this very special mingling of handling delicacy with visceral emotion and mechanical stoutness that makes it a driving delight that is hard to match these days. And that's going to lead me into my MilesPerHr word of the day, which for the Lotus Emira is amalgamate, meaning to unite or merge. And I'm not just talking about the fusion of those attributes I just mentioned, but really of the car and driver, the connection that we have. It involves you, it invites you, it inspires you. Now, before we dive right into pricing and competition, let's talk about the top speed and fuel economy of the Emira V6 manual. The fuel economy is 17 mpg in the city, 24 on the highway, and 20 combined, and the top speed is 180 miles per hour. The starting price of the V6 manual is $96,100, and this one, as tested, is $105,400. Now, the biggest rival for the Lotus Emira is the Porsche 718 Cayman GTS 4.0. It starts at $92,000. It makes 394 horsepower, gets to 60 in 3.8 seconds, has a top speed of 182 miles per hour, and fuel economy of 21 combined. If you don't have that kind of money to spend, there's also the Chevy Corvette Z51 that starts at $69,000. It makes 495 horsepower, gets to 60 in 2.9 seconds, has a top speed of 180 miles per hour, and fuel economy of 19 combined. Or if you want 4-ish seats, then there's the BMW M2 that starts at $63,000. It makes 453 horsepower, gets to 60 in 4.1 seconds, has a top speed of 177 miles per hour, and fuel economy of 19 combined. Now, just to start off with this statement, all of the cars I just mentioned are great to drive. And depending on your budget, if you find yourself in the Corvette versus M2 space, know this: the Corvette is the performance bargain of the decade. It is so good. Yes, it doesn't have a manual transmission option, but the manual in the M2 isn't all that engaging to drive, so I don't really think you're missing out on anything. I would get that over the M2. But if you have the extra money to spend, then both this and the Cayman GTS 4.0 are very much worth their premiums. And between these two cars, darn it, it's close. But to kind of tally our way to a verdict, starting with the exterior styling, the Emira transcends the competition. This car gets supercar attention from just about everyone. Even people who aren't into cars give this a good long look. And that continues on the interior. The cabin of the Emira feels so much more special than that Cayman does, which is so cut and dried. And then the driving experience. This gearbox is so much more engaging than the Caymans, which is a very good transmission. Be clear on that. That's just how good this gearbox is. And the steering is more of a preferential thing. I'm not going to say one is so much better than the other. It's just which do you prefer. This is so much lighter, especially on center, whereas the Cayman with its electronically assisted steering rack has a bit more going on dead center, and then you add lock and you get this fidelity, this tactility to the steering. This is a great steering rack. That is a great steering rack. But to kind of sum total it, the Emira takes this segment, and it does so pretty handily. I don't want to get into whether the people who put their deposits down for these cars are actually going to get them anytime in the next couple years or not. I know James from Throttle House has been waiting like 2 years for his. But the product itself it's brilliant. It really is. And it makes me so very sad to think that an internal combustion Lotus, the manual gearbox, is not going to be something in our future. Those who put a lot of stock into how a car drives need to savor a vehicle like the Lotus Emira. I certainly am, and it's the one I would choose in this very contentious segment.
Which would you guys choose though? Would you have the Lotus Emira? Would you have the Chevy Corvette Z51? Would you get that BMW M2? Or would you go for the main rival of this car, the Porsche 718 Cayman GTS 4.0? Let me know in the comments, and I hope you guys have enjoyed this POV drive review. If you did, please like, comment, and share it. Subscribe to the channel, hit that bell to get notified, and I'll see you next time.